bunch of libs got together and decided to sue the Trump administration over something that pretty much everyone agrees on. Harvard is trying desperately to not become the next Columbia and lose a bunch of federal funding. And also, TikTok's sale is fast approaching. Will the United States get that deal done? A new player has jumped into the mix. Deadline is Saturday. All that and more coming up on this episode of Turning Point Tonight. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. This is Turning Point Tonight. Now, before we get to any of those stories, this is something that I think every American should know, especially if you care about where your tax dollars are going and don't like to see the libs lie and get away with it. Libs constantly complain about cuts to, well, pretty much anything. They pretend that any cuts will hurt the poor, and they have a better chance at winning that argument if there are more poor people. Well, who gets to decide who is poor and therefore who gets benefits? Well, for the last couple decades, it's been the US Census. According to the Wall Street Journal, the census has overstated the extent of poverty because, get this, it doesn't count about 88% of income in transfer payments made to households that are classified as low income. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, well, we often hear about this income gap, but whatever we do, the libs leave out this massive caveat when you talk about the income gap. The Census Bureau doesn't count about 90% of the purchase power given out to the lower income class, which means that when you're measuring income, they don't include things like refundable tax credits, food stamp debit cards, Medicaid, and about 100 other federal, state, and local transfer payment income programs. In other words, the census fails to account for about $2 trillion in government benefits that are given to low-income households to meet their needs. Now, because they don't count those payments, the census says the average household income that's in the bottom fifth or the bottom 20% is only about $17,650, again, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, if you count all of the money that the government gives to low-income people, well, that number goes up to about $65,000, which is about the median household income. So, in other words, if you count all of the money that goes to lower-income people and don't just leave it out, well, there's less poor people. The CBO, the Congressional Budgeting Office, put out a new poverty measure that does factor in all of those transfer payments in January. And when you do, the estimates for the poverty rate in the most recent year, which is 2021, instead of the 11.6% rate that the census has, well, is actually about 0.8%, substantially lower. In other words, libs are fudging the numbers in order to push their narrative that the United States, the average United States family is way worse off than they are, and the poorest among us are disastrously worse off than they really are because they leave out so many important statistics. Here to talk about that and so much more is comedian Dave Hahn and Turning Point Frontlines reporter Brandon Drey. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Brandon, I want to start with you. I want to start with you, Brandon. This whole idea, you see Bernie Sanders and AOC, they're on like this big tour where they actually are pulling some big audiences, and all of their arguments really cater to the fact of look at how many poor and impoverished people are. But like you just said, they don't, when they factor in those numbers, they don't count any of the money that the government already gives. I guess the question is, how do we get people to recognize that purchasing power is really what matters? And when it comes to purchasing power, the bottom 20% of Americans aren't as bad off as Bernie and folks like to make it seem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just surprised that people aren't talking about this more. I mean, according to this article, it's showing that America really isn't as poor as it seems. So why are we pushing this narrative when we should just be telling people to get back to work and stop taking money from the government?
Yeah, it really is not a great look. David, so when the Trump administration took over, they obviously have some influence into the Census Bureau. Do you think that this is going to be a big enough thing? The Wall Street Journal is trying to make it a big thing. I'm trying to make it a big thing. But do you think it gets to bubble up to where people, want to adjust for all of the purchasing power that we, the taxpayer, give to all these folks?
No, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. I don't think people are interested in numbers. They're only really interested in numbers that suit their worldview. So, but here's the thing. So I would think that the Democrats would want to push this idea that transfer payments does reduce poverty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a way for them to show that the programs work, right?
Yeah. That should be the point. Wouldn't this be like a thing like, hey, look, their poverty rate went down because of how much money are they giving? But of course, yeah, that kind of works against itself. If you have a bad idea, a good point in that bad idea doesn't make the bad idea go away. It still says, oh yeah, we need to keep saying people are more poor than they actually are, or else our money will dry up. Speaking of people who don't want money to dry up, Harvard doesn't want to get Columbia'd. We all remember the story from last week or a couple weeks ago where the Trump administration pulled about $400 million in funding. On Monday or Tuesday of this week, the administration was eyeing $9 billion that was going to Harvard University and saying, hey, are you guys meeting the standards? Now, in order to preempt that, the new, I think he's an interim president of Harvard because Claudine Gay had to resign last year. They have removed the diversity, equity, and inclusion statement for faculty hiring. They've launched an intellectual vitality program aimed at expanding open dialogue. They dismissed some of the controversial Center for Middle Eastern Studies department people. They've reinforced intellectual diversity guidelines across programs. They've done a bunch of different things to preempt the Trump administration from eliminating that. Brandon, is that enough? Do we need to push harder, or is it so infected with woke ideology that even this sort of stuff doesn't do it justice, or isn't good enough?
I mean, they're going to get money regardless because they get billions of dollars in endowment. So, we shouldn't be funding any of this in general, because what are they producing at the end of the day? They're producing a bunch of lost children who take to the streets and protest for things that they don't even know what they're talking about or believing in. So, I think we should just cut the funding out altogether and let them figure it out on their own until they want to start teaching, ideas of free markets and American values that are going to make America really prosperous in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that it might be not worth saving. Hey, Dave, same question. Is this a step in the right direction that maybe we can get the university systems back? Because, despite all of the woke craziness, they do have well-funded labs. They've got pretty smart people. They're doing stuff that are outside of the political realm that might actually benefit the taxpayer. Is it a, burn it to the ground situation, or is it, something that, hey, this is progress at the very least in the right direction?
Look, I don't think we should be funding universities just in general. I mean, how much money are we giving them? What is this? $800 million? Is that the number for them? $4 million.
This is $9 billion.
$9 billion. They have like a $50 billion endowment. Why does the taxpayer need to give them any money? Well, that's the thing too, right? So you have the elite university. All of these people are going to come out of there with pretty well-paying jobs. They have a over $50 billion endowment. Like they have enough money. I don't know why we need to give them $9 billion.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously some complexities there, and it'll be interesting to kind of see if that actually works. And the Trump administration says, "Oh yeah, you're in the right direction," but I guess that kind of remains to be seen, depending on Trump. But you're right to the extent. I think both of you hinted at the fact that coming out of these universities are a bunch of lib commies. And one thing that we found out that it's fascinating to me, there's a guy named James Lindsay. If people aren't familiar with him, go look him up. He's hilarious and also very, very smart. He has reiterated so often that communists lie. That's kind of like part of the whole thing. In order to bring apart this communist revolution, well, you have to lie about stuff. And so commies just lie. And I think one of the bigger lies that have been circulating around is the numerous attempts that the mainstream media has tried to drive a wedge between President Trump and Elon. There was a big scoop yesterday that Elon is resigning from his post, even I say reputable outlets. I happen to think TMZ is a very reputable outlet, but some people might not agree. Even they were saying, yeah, Elon's done pretty soon. The White House and Elon responded, no, what are you talking about? And I would imagine that the whole story was completely and entirely fabricated. Brandon, is somebody who takes journalism and reporting seriously, you know, what do you do about the fact that some people out there that call themselves journalists and reporters are just willing to flat out lie about things?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because when you click on this Politico Journo's X account, she has like 3 different titles: Capitol Bureau Chief, Senior Washington Columnist, Contributing Political Correspondent, all touting some idea that she knows everything. But when she puts out bogus stories like this and gets debunked within hours of publishing, it's hilarious to watch them say absolutely nothing to defend their source or their scoop. You know, when I was in college studying journalism, my professor told us we're only as good of a reporter as our sources. So I'll let that speak for itself. I mean, we're living in the greatest timeline right now where they put out these articles and for these unnamed sources, and then they just become completely false within minutes. It's quite the timeline that we're living in right now.
Yeah, it is really interesting that people just think they can get up on and lie about things. Hey, Dave, so somebody who kind of gets up on stage and tells jokes, I know comedy is not the journalism world, but at the same time, you know, if you're just flat out lying to an audience, you will hear it. I don't know, maybe we should like form some sort of arena where journalists have to get up there, and if they're lying, they get booed out of the building like you would if you're trying to BS your audience.
Well, you know, there's some embellishment. There's some inherent to stand up. You know, I'm not that great of a storyteller, so I can't just make things up out of whole cloth. You know, there has to be some truth in the things that I. But apparently, to be a journalist, most of the time there can be zero truth, and you can get out and stuff. And I have yet to see any journalist issue any mea culpas or apologies for being completely wrong. And, you know, this goes back years, more or more. I mean, this was happening during the Obama administration anyways. Yeah, I just, the fact of the matter is they don't care about lying. They don't care about being, you know, hypocrites. None of that. And so, you know, as going back to James Lindsay, he just points out that to them, it's just a means to an end.
Yeah.
So they could just tell the lie. You get enough people to believe it. It doesn't matter at that point if it's proven to be false, because the people who are going to believe it. So that's what they're doing. They're just lying so they can propagate it and then move on to the next thing, as if what they just said, you know, wasn't completely false.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it sounds like you've just eliminated yourself from contention at a job at MSNBC, since you can't make things up and just promote them as truth. So sorry that happened. Brandon, Dave will be right back after the break to talk more about the news of the day, and also we'll check in with our White House correspondent Monica Page right after the break. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.